Jake stared at his laptop screen for the 10th time that morning, scrolling through the same empty inbox. 3 months of searching for a roommate, and still nothing. His bank account was getting dangerously low, and rent was due in 2 weeks. The downtown Portland apartment that seemed like such a good idea 6 months ago now felt like a financial nightmare. Come on, he muttered, refreshing his email again. Someone has to need a place to live. His Craigslist ad had been up for weeks. Nice apartment, reasonable rent, no crazy rules. What more could people want? But apparently, finding the right roommate was harder than debugging code. And that was saying something. Jake worked as a software developer for a small tech company. Nothing fancy, just building websites and fixing databases. The pay was decent, but not decent enough to cover a $1,500 rent by himself. When his previous roommate moved out to live with his girlfriend, Jake thought finding a replacement would be easy. He was wrong. The doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. Jake glanced at the time on his laptop. 2:30 in the afternoon. He wasn't expecting anyone. Maybe it was the pizza delivery guy at the wrong apartment again. He walked to the door and looked through the peephole. A woman stood in the hallway, but the angle made it hard to see her clearly. She had long, dark hair and was wearing a simple black jacket. Jake couldn't remember scheduling any apartment viewings for today, but his memory had been pretty scattered lately. Hello, he called through the door. Hi, I'm here about the room, came a soft voice from the other side. I saw your ad online. Jake quickly ran his fingers through his messy hair and opened the door. The woman standing in his doorway was stunning in a way that made him forget how to speak for a moment. She had pale, almost porcelain skin that seemed to glow under the hallway lights. Her eyes were an unusual shade of green, and her features looked like they belonged in a painting rather than on a real person. I'm Zara, she said, extending her hand. Her grip was surprisingly cold, but firm. Jake, he managed, still trying to process how someone this beautiful was interested in his cramped apartment. Come in, please. Zara stepped inside and looked around with an intensity that seemed unusual for a casual apartment viewing. Her eyes moved systematically across every corner, every piece of furniture, like she was memorizing the layout. It's nice, she said, though her tone was neutral. Very functional. Jake gave her the standard tour, showing her the kitchen, living room, and the spare bedroom that would be hers. She asked very few questions, which was strange. Most people wanted to know about utilities, internet speed, parking, house rules. Zara just nodded and observed. The rent is $750 a month, plus half of utilities. Jake explained as they finished the tour. First month and security deposit upfront. That's acceptable, Zara said, reaching into her jacket. She pulled out an envelope and handed it to him. Here's 6 months in advance. Jake opened the envelope and nearly dropped it. Cash. More cash than he'd seen in one place in years. All in crisp, new bills. This is, wow. You don't need to pay this much upfront, he said, though internally he was already calculating how much breathing room this would give him. I prefer to settle financial matters quickly. Zara replied, I can move in tonight, if that works for you. Tonight? Jake blinked. Don't you want to think about it? Check out other places? Ask about my references or background or something? Zara tilted her head slightly, like she was considering something. That won't be necessary. You seem suitable. There was something about the way she said suitable that made Jake feel like he was being evaluated for more than just roommate compatibility. But 6 months of rent and cash had a way of making him overlook his concerns. Okay then, he said. Welcome home, I guess. Zara moved in that same evening with only 2 small suitcases and a large, oddly shaped bag that she carried very carefully. Jake offered to help, but she declined politely. She disappeared into her room for a few hours, and when she emerged, the space somehow felt different, more organized, more intentional. The first week living with Zara was the strangest week of Jake's life. She was the perfect roommate in many ways, quiet, clean, and she never hogged the bathroom. But there were things about her that didn't add up. For starters, she never seemed to sleep. Jake was a night owl himself, often coding until 2 or 3 in the morning. But no matter how late he stayed up, he could see light coming from under Zara's door. And no matter how early he woke up, she was already in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of tea, looking like she'd been awake for hours. Her eating habits were another mystery. Jake's refrigerator had never been so organized. Zara bought very specific foods, mostly fruits and vegetables he'd never heard of from specialty stores across town. She prepared meals that looked like works of art, but never offered to share them. When Jake asked where she found such unusual ingredients, she just said she had reliable sources. Then there were the small things that made his brain itch, like how she always knew when he was about to come home, having his favorite snacks waiting on the kitchen counter, or how she seemed to understand his work problems better than he did, occasionally dropping hints that helped him solve coding issues he'd been struggling with for days. "Have you tried approaching the database query from a recursive angle?" she asked one evening as Jake stared frustrated at his laptop. "Recursive. That's actually brilliant," Jake said, typing rapidly. "How did you know that would work?" "Lucky. Guess," Zara replied, but her smile suggested otherwise. The electronics in the apartment started acting weird too. Jake's normally reliable internet connection became lightning fast. His old television suddenly picked up channels he'd never seen before, showing programs and languages he couldn't identify. The lights flickered at random times, but only when Zara was in the room. Jake told himself he was imagining things. Maybe living alone for too long had made him paranoid. Maybe having an attractive roommate was just messing with his head. But deep down, he knew something was different about Zara. She carried secrets in her eyes, ancient ones that didn't match her apparent age, and sometimes, late at night when he thought she couldn't hear him, Jake swore he could hear her talking to someone in her room. Not on the phone, but actual conversation. The problem was, he never heard another voice answering back, whatever Zara's story was. Jake was about to discover that his life had just taken a turn into something far stranger than he could have ever imagined. The next morning, Jake woke up wondering if everything that happened was just a crazy dream. But when he walked into the kitchen, Zara was sitting at the table with 2 cups of coffee, and the way she looked at him told him it had all been real. "How are you feeling?" she asked, studying his face carefully. Jake sat down and took a sip of coffee. It tasted different than usual, richer somehow, like my entire world just got turned upside down. He said, which I guess it did. "The training starts today," Zara said simply. "We don't have much time. And there's a lot you need to learn." "Training for what exactly?" Zara stood up and walked to what Jake had always thought was just a decorative panel on the living room wall. She placed her hand against it, and suddenly the panel slid away, revealing a space filled with objects that definitely weren't from Earth. "How long has that been there?" Jake asked, staring at the hidden compartment. "Since the day I moved in," Zara said, pulling out what looked like a headband made of some kind of metal that shifted colors in the light. "I had to make sure you were ready before showing you any of this." The device in her hands hummed softly, and Jake could feel something pulling at the back of his mind, like a radio trying to tune into a signal. "This will help connect your brain to our technology," Zara explained. "But I have to warn you, the process isn't easy. Your body needs to adapt to things it was never designed for." Jake looked at the device nervously. "What kind of things?" "Enhanced perception, faster reflexes, the ability to see and manipulate energy patterns," Zara said. "Think of it like upgrading your computer, except the computer is your brain." She handed him the headband, and the moment it touched his skin, Jake felt a jolt of electricity run through his entire body, not painful, but intense, like every nerve ending had suddenly woken up. "Put it on," Zara said gently. "I'll be right here with you." Jake slipped the device over his head, and the world exploded into colors he'd never seen before. The walls of his apartment weren't just white anymore. They were covered in patterns of light that moved and shifted like living things. Zara herself looked completely different, surrounded by an aura of blue energy that pulsed with her heartbeat. "I can see," Jake started to say, but couldn't find words for what he was seeing. "Energy." Zara finished. "Everything has it. Every person. Every object, every living thing. Most humans can't see it, but with our technology, you can. The training that followed was unlike anything Jake could have imagined. Each day, Zara would introduce him to new devices, new ways of seeing and interacting with the world around him. She taught him to move objects with his mind, to sense people's emotions from across the room, to understand the patterns of energy that flowed through everything. But the changes weren't just mental. Jake's body was transforming too. He could run faster and longer than ever before. His reflexes became so quick that he could catch falling objects before he'd even consciously seen them drop. When he looked in the mirror, his eyes sometimes seemed to have flecks of the same blue light that surrounded Zara. "Is this permanent?" he asked one evening after a particularly intense training session. "I don't know," Zara admitted. "We've never tried this with a human before. You're the first." The honesty in her voice was both reassuring and terrifying. Jake was becoming something new, something that had never existed before, and nobody knew what that meant. The hardest part wasn't the physical changes or even learning to use alien technology. The hardest part was keeping it all secret. Jake still had to go to work every day, still had to act normal around his friends and family. But normal was becoming increasingly difficult at work. He found himself solving problems before his coworkers had even finished explaining them. He could sense when people were lying, when they were stressed. When they were happy, the office computers seemed to respond to him differently, running faster and more efficiently when he was around. "You seem different lately," his boss mentioned one day. "More focused. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." If only he knew. Jake thought the worst part was the loneliness. He couldn't tell anyone what was happening to him. When his best friend called to hang out, Jake had to make excuses. When his parents invited him for dinner, he had to pretend everything was normal while internally feeling like he was becoming someone else entirely. Zara understood, though she'd been alone on Earth for months before finding him, carrying the weight of her planet's destruction and the responsibility of saving this one. As the days passed, Jake found himself relying on her more and more, not just for training, but for companionship. "Do you miss your home?" he asked her one night as they practiced using a device that looked like a crystal but felt warm and alive in his hands. "Every day," she said quietly, "but missing it won't bring it back. All I can do is try to make sure other people don't have to feel what I feel." Their relationship was changing too, becoming something deeper than just roommates, or even teacher and student. There was a connection between them that went beyond words, understanding that came from sharing something no one else could comprehend. But it wasn't without problems. The energy that flowed through Jake was sometimes too much for his human body to handle. He'd wake up in the middle of the night with fever and chills, his body fighting against the changes happening inside him. Zara would sit with him during these episodes, using her own energy to help stabilize his. "I'm scared," he admitted during one particularly bad night, his whole body shaking as waves of alien energy coursed through him. "I know," Zara said, holding his hand, "but you're stronger than you think, stronger than most humans could ever be." 3 weeks into the training, strange things started happening around the city. Electronic devices would malfunction for no reason. Animals would act strangely, gathering in unusual places. The local news started reporting on unexplained phenomena, lights in the sky, electromagnetic disturbances, people claiming to see things that weren't there. "Are we causing this?" Jake asked. "Not directly," Zara said, "but your transformation is creating ripples. Other beings are starting to notice that something is changing on Earth." "Other beings? Not all of them are friendly," Zara said grimly. "Some species believe that Earth should be allowed to fall to the wave. Others want to harvest what they can before it arrives. And a few think that humans are too dangerous to be allowed to survive. Even with our protection," Jake felt a chill. That had nothing to do with the energy coursing through his body. "So we're not just racing against time. We're racing against other aliens too." "Yes," Zara said. "And some of them are already here." That night, Jake dreamed of silver ships moving through the darkness between stars, heading toward Earth with intentions he couldn't understand but somehow knew were not good. when he woke up. He realized the dreams weren't dreams at all. They were visions. Another ability that was developing as his transformation continued. The countdown was ticking, and Earth was about to become a much more complicated place. Jake woke up to the sound of Zara packing. It was still dark outside, but she was moving around the apartment with urgent energy, gathering the alien devices from their hiding spots and placing them carefully into travel bags. "What's happening?" Jake asked, rubbing his eyes. The digital clock showed for 15 in the morning. "We have to leave," Zara said without looking up. "Now, they found us." "Who found us?" As if in answer to his question, Jake heard a low humming sound coming from outside. He walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. 3 black cars were parked on the street below, and people in dark suits were getting out of them. They moved with the kind of coordination that screamed government agents. "How did they know?" Jake asked. Stepping away from the window. "The energy signatures from your training," Zara explained. "Still packing. We tried to keep them low, but apparently not low enough. They've been monitoring unusual electromagnetic activity across the city." Jake's stomach dropped. "Are we in trouble?" "Not the kind you're thinking of," Zara said. "They don't want to arrest us. They want to study us, and we don't have time for that." She handed him a backpack filled with some of the alien technology. "We need to get to Oregon. There's a place called Crater Lake. That's where the device is hidden. The device that's supposed to save the world. Yes, but we have to reach it before they stop us. And before the other aliens find it first." Jake quickly threw some clothes into another bag, his mind racing. 2 months ago, his biggest worry was paying rent on time. Now he was apparently part of some cosmic mission to save humanity. Life had a weird sense of humor. They managed to slip out through the buildings. Back exit just as the agents were entering the front lobby. Zara had somehow acquired a car during her time on Earth. A plain sedan that looked ordinary, but ran quieter than any vehicle Jake had ever been in. "Where exactly did you get this car?" he asked as they drove through the empty streets. "It's better if you don't ask too many questions about my methods," Zara said with a small smile. They drove through the night, taking back roads and avoiding major highways. Zara seemed to know exactly where every traffic camera and checkpoint was located. Jake dozed fitfully in the passenger seat, his dreams filled with visions of the approaching wave of destruction and images of other worlds that had already fallen to it. When he woke up, the sun was rising, and they were driving through mountains covered in thick forests. The landscape was beautiful, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "How much farther?" he asked. "About 2 hours," Zara replied. "But we have a problem." She pointed to the rear-view mirror. 3 vehicles were following them, staying just far enough back to avoid being obvious about it. Jake recognized the black cars from outside their apartment. "They're persistent," he said. "Government agents usually are, but they're not our biggest concern right now." Jake was about to ask what she meant when he saw something that made his blood go cold. High above them, barely visible against the morning sky, were shapes that definitely weren't airplanes. They moved smoothly, changed direction too quickly, and seemed to shimmer like heat mirages. "Those are the other aliens you mentioned, aren't they?" Jake said. "Some of them," Zara confirmed grimly. "The ones who don't want us to succeed." "Why not?" "Because if we save Earth, it proves that the wave can be stopped. And some species have built their entire economy around scavenging from worlds. After the wave destroys them, others believe that any planet too weak to defend itself deserves to fall." Jake stared up at the alien ships, feeling very small and very human. "So we're fighting a cosmic protection racket? Something like that." The next hour passed in tense silence. The government cars continued following them, and the alien ships kept pace overhead. Jake found himself checking the side mirrors obsessively, waiting for something bad to happen. It did. The first sign of trouble was when all the electronic devices in their car started going crazy. The radio began cycling through stations on its own. The GPS screen showed locations that didn't exist, and the dashboard lights flickered in patterns that hurt to look at. "They're scanning us," Zara said, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "The government agents? No. The ships." A moment later, Jake understood what she meant. One of the ships descended from the clouds, moving silently toward their car. It was sleek and metallic, about the size of a school bus, and it made Jake's enhanced senses scream with warning signals. "What do they want?" he asked. "You," Zara said simply, or more specifically. "They want to stop you from reaching the device. If they can't do that, they'll try to capture you and use your abilities for themselves." The ship positioned itself directly above their car, and Jake felt a strange pulling sensation, like invisible hands were trying to lift him from his seat. "They're using a tractor beam," Zara said through gritted teeth. "Hold on." She swerved suddenly, taking an exit ramp at dangerous speed. The alien ship followed, but the sudden change in direction seemed to disrupt whatever they were doing. The pulling sensation stopped, and Jake could breathe normally again. Behind them, the government cars were struggling to keep up with Zara's aggressive driving. Jake watched in the mirror as one of them took the turn too fast and ended up in a ditch. "I feel bad for those agents," he said. "They're just doing their job. Their job is going to get the entire planet killed if they interfere with us," Zara replied. They drove through smaller and smaller roads, winding deeper into the Oregon mountains. The alien ship continued following them, sometimes disappearing into the clouds, sometimes dropping down to hover just above the treetops. Jake could feel its presence like a constant weight on his shoulders. "How much farther?" he asked again. "We're close," Zara said. "I can feel the device calling to me. It knows we're here." Devices can feel things. This one can. It's been waiting for thousands of years for someone like us to activate it. As they crested a hill, Jake saw it. Crater Lake spread out below them like a perfect blue circle cut into the earth. It was more beautiful than any photograph he'd ever seen. But there was something else about it. Something that made his enhanced senses tingle with recognition. "It's down there," he said, not really asking. "Under the water. At the very bottom," Zara confirmed, "and we have about 12 hours before the wave reaches Earth's solar system." Jake looked at the lake, then up at the alien ship still hovering overhead, then back at the road where the remaining government cars were still pursuing them. In 12 hours, either they would save the world, or everything he'd ever known would cease to exist. "So," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "what's the plan?" The plan, as it turned out, was both simpler and more terrifying than Jake had imagined. They had to dive to the bottom of Crater Lake, find an ancient alien device, and activate it before the cosmic wave arrived. The catch was that the device was nearly 2,000 feet underwater, and activating it would require both of them to merge their consciousness with alien technology. That might not let them come back unchanged. "You're telling me we have to dive to the bottom of one of the deepest lakes in America, without scuba gear, and somehow not drown?" Jake asked as they parked near the lake's edge. "The technology will help us," Zara said, pulling strange devices from their bags. "These will let us breathe underwater and withstand the pressure. But Jake, I need to tell you something important." The way she said it made his stomach clench with worry. "What?" "Once we activate the device, I won't be able to stay in this physical form anymore. The energy required to power the planetary shield will use up everything I have left." Jake stared at her, feeling like someone had punched him in the chest. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means I'll still exist, but not in a way you can touch or talk to normally. I'll become part of the energy that protects Earth." "No," Jake said immediately. "There has to be another way." "There isn't." Zara's voice was gentle but firm. "This is what I came here to do. What we came here to do." Jake wanted to argue, to find some solution that would save the world without losing her. But the alien ship was still circling overhead and in the distance. He could see the government agents had found them again. Time was running out. "What about me?" he asked. "What happens to me after we activate this thing?" "I don't know," Zara admitted. "The device will change you, probably permanently. You might become something between human and my species. You might gain new abilities, or lose some of your human ones. There's no way to predict it." Jake looked out at the impossibly blue water of Crater Lake. Somewhere far beneath its surface was a device that could save everyone he'd ever cared about. All it would cost him was the person he'd grown to love. and any chance of returning to his normal life. Some choice, he muttered. It is a choice, Zara said, taking his hand. You can walk away right now. The agents will probably take you into protective custody, and you'll be safe when the wave hits. You won't have to watch what happens to everyone else. You know I can't do that. I know. That's one of the things I love about you. The word love hung in the air between them like a bridge Jake desperately wanted to cross, but knew led to goodbye. The sound of approaching helicopters interrupted the moment. Government aircraft were converging on their location, and the alien ship was descending toward the lake's surface. Now or never, Zara said. They ran toward the water, carrying the alien breathing devices. Jake had never been a strong swimmer, but apparently that was another thing his transformation had improved. The moment they hit the water, the devices activated, creating a bubble of breathable atmosphere around their heads and regulating the pressure as they dove deeper. The descent felt like falling through liquid space. The water was so clear that Jake could see for hundreds of feet in every direction, but it was also eerily quiet. Their only company was the occasional fish and the strange blue glow that seemed to emanate from the depths below. There, Zara said, her voice somehow carrying clearly through the water. Do you see it? Jake looked down and saw something that made his breath catch far below them. Resting on the lake bed like a sleeping giant was a structure that definitely hadn't been built by humans. It was massive, maybe the size of a city block, and covered in the same geometric patterns Jake had seen in his visions of Zara's homeworld. How long has that been down there? He asked. Since before your species learned to make fire, Zara replied. My people left emergency devices on many worlds, hoping that someday they might be needed. As they swam closer, the structure began to glow, responding to their presence. Jake could feel it calling to him, recognizing the alien technology that now flowed through his modified genetics. But they weren't alone. The hostile alien ship had somehow followed them underwater, moving through the lake like it was flying through air, and behind it came something even stranger, other beings that looked almost human but moved too gracefully, their eyes glowing with the same light Jake had seen in Zara's. More of your people? Jake asked. No, Zara said grimly. Those are the collectors. They harvest the energy from dying worlds. If they get to the device first, they'll use it to amplify the wave instead of stopping it. The race was on. Jake and Zara swam as fast as they could toward the device while the collectors closed in from above. Jake's enhanced abilities kicked in, and he found himself moving through the water faster than should have been possible. Zara keeping pace beside him, they reached the device just as the collectors arrived. Up close, Jake could see that the beings weren't quite as human as they'd appeared from a distance. Their skin had a metallic sheen, and their fingers ended in sharp points that sparked with electricity. Activated now, Zara shouted as the collectors surrounded them. Jake placed his hands on the device's surface and immediately felt a shock of connection that went beyond anything he'd experienced during training. The device was alive in a way that made him understand why Zara's people had been able to create such advanced technology. It wasn't just a machine, it was a living system that responded to thought and intention, but it wouldn't activate for him alone. It needed both of them. Zara placed her hands next to his, and suddenly Jake could see everything, the approaching wave of destruction. Still hours away, but moving at impossible speed, the other worlds it had already consumed, the network of similar devices scattered across the galaxy, most of them dark and silent because there had been no one left to activate them. Together, Zara said, and Jake felt her consciousness merge with his. The device responded instantly, sending a pulse of energy up through the water that Jake knew would expand to envelop the entire solar system. But as it activated, he felt Zara's physical form beginning to dissolve, her energy flowing into the protective barrier that would shield Earth. Wait, Jake tried to hold onto her, but she was becoming light and energy, impossible to grasp. I'll always be here, her voice echoed in his mind as her physical body faded away. Whenever you look up at the stars, whenever you feel the warmth of the sun, I'll be part of what's keeping it all safe. The collectors shrieked in frustration as the device's energy repelled them, sending them fleeing back toward the surface. Jake felt himself changing too, his human consciousness expanding to accommodate new knowledge, new abilities, new responsibilities. When he finally surfaced in Crater Lake, the government agents were waiting for him, but they didn't try to arrest him. They just stared as Jake walked out of the water, his eyes now carrying the same blue light that had once belonged to Zara. "It's done," he told them simply. "Earth is safe." High above, the hostile alien ships were retreating, defeated. The wave would hit the solar system's edge in a few hours, but it would find a barrier waiting for it, powered by the love between a human and an alien who had given everything to save a world. 6 months later, Jake was still living in Portland, but his life had changed in ways he was still discovering. He could sense when other aliens visited Earth, and many did. Now that word had spread about the successful defense, most came in peace, curious about the planet that had managed to save itself. Jake had become an unofficial ambassador, helping other humans who were contacted by alien visitors. His apartment was once again shared, but now with a rotation of people learning to cope with their own transformations and revelations about the universe. Sometimes, on clear nights, Jake would stand on his balcony and look up at the stars. He couldn't see Zara anymore, not with his eyes, but he could feel her presence in the protective energy that surrounded Earth. She kept her promise. She was still there, woven into the very fabric of the barrier that kept them all safe. And sometimes, when the conditions were just right, he could swear he heard her voice on the wind, reminding him that love really could transcend any distance, even the space between stars. 3 weeks after Zara moved in, Jake's life had settled into a routine that felt both normal and completely bizarre at the same time. He'd gotten used to her strange habits, the way she never seemed to eat regular food, and how she always knew things she shouldn't know. But nothing could have prepared him for what happened on that Tuesday night in October. Jake had been working late again, trying to fix a stubborn piece of code that kept crashing the company's website. His eyes burned from staring at the screen, and his neck ached from hunching over his laptop. By the time he finally gave up and went to bed, it was almost 2 in the morning. He fell into a deep sleep almost immediately, the kind of exhausted sleep where you don't dream, you just disappear into darkness. But something pulled him back to consciousness. Not a sound, not a movement, just a feeling that something had changed in his room. Jake's eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim light filtering through his bedroom curtains. The digital clock on his nightstand glowed red in the darkness. 3:33 a.m. Why did he always seem to wake up at weird times lately? That's when he saw her. Zara was sitting on the edge of his bed, but not in a way that made sense. She wasn't touching the mattress. She was somehow suspended above it, her legs crossed, her hands resting gently on her knees, and her eyes were glowing with a soft, blue-white light that made his room look like it was underwater. Jake's first instinct was to panic, to jump up and demand answers. But instead, he felt the strangest sense of calm wash over him. It was like someone had injected peace directly into his bloodstream. His racing heart slowed down, and his breathing became steady. And even, "Don't be afraid," Zara said, though her lips barely moved. Her voice seemed to come from inside his head rather than from her mouth. "I need to tell you something important." She moved closer, still floating slightly above the bed, until she was positioned over him. Her hands reached out and touched his temples, and Jake felt a warmth spread through his skull like gentle electricity. "Your species is running out of time, Jake," she whispered. And now her voice was definitely coming from her lips, soft but urgent. "In 47 days, everything you know will cease to exist unless you help me complete the mission I was sent here for." The words should have sounded crazy. They should have made Jake think his roommate had lost her mind. Instead, they felt true in a way that made his chest tight with worry. "What are you talking about?" he managed to ask, though his voice came out as barely a whisper. Zara's glowing eyes looked directly into his, and suddenly Jake wasn't in his bedroom anymore. He was floating in space, looking down at Earth from impossible heights. The planet looked different than in any photo he'd ever seen. There were lights on the surface that pulsed with patterns, like a heartbeat made of electricity. And there was something else. Something dark moving toward their solar system like a massive shadow. "I'm not from here," Zara said, and Jake found himself back in his room, though he could still feel the vastness of space in his memory. "I'm from a place very far away, farther than your telescopes can see. My people have been watching Earth for a long time, trying to protect it." She lifted her hands from his temples and sat back, though she was still floating. The glow in her eyes dimmed slightly, making her look more human, but somehow that made everything feel more real. "Not less. Protected from what?" Jake asked. "There's something coming," Zara said. "A wave of energy that destroys solar systems. It's already taken 12 worlds that we know of. My planet was one of them." Jake's mind struggled to process what she was telling him. "Your planet is gone." "Not gone," Zara corrected. "Changed. Everyone I knew, everything I loved, it all became something else, something cold and empty. We managed to save some of our people by sending them to other worlds, other dimensions. I was sent here because Earth is next in the path of this wave." "But why me?" Jake asked. "I'm nobody special. I fix computer problems and eat too much pizza. What could I possibly do to help save the world?" Zara smiled, and for the first time since he'd known her, it looked completely genuine. "You're more special than you know. Some humans carry genetic markers that make them compatible with our technology. Out of everyone on this planet, maybe 1 in 10 million has what we need. You're one of them." "That's impossible," Jake said, but even as he said it, he remembered all the strange things that had been happening. The way electronics worked better around him lately. The dreams he'd been having about places he'd never seen. The feeling that he could understand Zara's thoughts sometimes before she spoke them. "Is it?" Zara asked. "Haven't you noticed things changing? Haven't you felt different since I moved in?" Jake had noticed. He'd been ignoring it, telling himself it was just stress or coincidence. But the changes were real. His reflexes were faster. His thinking was clearer. And sometimes he swore he could sense what people were feeling just by looking at them. "What did you do to me?" he asked, though he wasn't angry, just curious. "I didn't do anything," Zara said. "I just activated what was already there, like turning on a light switch that was always connected, just waiting for power." She reached out and took his hand. Her skin was still cold, but it felt right somehow, like they were pieces of a puzzle that fit together perfectly. "The wave will reach Earth in 47 days, she continued. "There's a device hidden on your planet, left here by my people thousands of years ago. It can create a barrier that will protect your solar system, but it needs both of us to activate it. Someone from my world and someone from yours with the right genetic compatibility." Jake stared at her, trying to wrap his head around everything. She told him, "And if we don't activate this device, then Earth becomes like my world. Everyone you've ever known, everyone you've ever loved, they'll all be changed into something that isn't really alive anymore." The weight of what she was saying settled on Jake's shoulders like a heavy blanket. Save the world or watch it die. Help an alien or let humanity end. It sounded like something from a movie, except he was living it. "Why should I believe you?" he asked, though part of him already did, instead of answering with words. Zara closed her eyes and touched his forehead again. Suddenly Jake could see her memories like they were his own. A beautiful world with purple skies and silver cities. Millions of people living in harmony with technology that seemed like magic. Then the wave hitting, and everything changing, the people becoming empty shells. The cities going dark. He saw Zara's escape, her journey through space in a vessel that bent reality around it. Her arrival on Earth and her search for someone like him. He felt her loneliness, her fear, and her desperate hope that maybe this time they could save a world before it was too late. When the visions ended, Jake found tears on his cheeks that he didn't remember shedding.